Footsteps echoed in the empty mansion, masking the growl of a starving king. Gabriel Navarro hadn't eaten a full meal in 18 months. Poison paranoia was killing him faster than his rivals ever could. Then a plus-size maid named Bridget walked into his kitchen and changed the underworld forever. Gabriel Navarro, head of the Navarro Syndicate, was dying. He wasn't bleeding out from a gunshot wound or rotting away in a federal penitentiary. He was simply wasting away in his own opulent dining room. At 6'2", Gabriel had once been a physically imposing force, a man whose sheer presence commanded respect in the dark underbelly of Chicago. Now the tailored Italian suits hung off his gaunt frame, like rags on a scarecrow. His cheekbones jutted sharply against pale skin, and his dark eyes were sunken into deep, bruised hollows. He weighed barely 140 pounds. For 18 months, a crippling psychological terror had gripped him. Ever since a near-fatal assassination attempt, where odorless, tasteless thallium had been slipped into his favorite risotto by a trusted chef, Gabriel's throat had practically closed up. Every plate of food looked like a loaded gun. Every aroma smelled of bitter almonds and death. He lived on nutritional shakes that he unsealed himself, and even those he frequently threw up his ruined stomach, rejecting the artificial sludge. Sitting at the end of a 20-foot mahogany table, Gabriel stared at a plate of seared scallops. The current chef, a culinary genius poached from a Michelin-starred restaurant in Paris, stood trembling by the double doors. Gabriel picked up his fork. His hand shook. He brought a tiny piece to his lips. The moment the rich, buttery texture hit his tongue, his chest tightened. His brain screamed, toxin, danger, betrayal. He violently shoved the plate away, the fine china shattering against the hardwood floor. "Get him out of my sight!" Gabriel rasped his voice, a dry, hollow scrape. Deegan Butler, Gabriel's underboss and oldest confidant, stepped forward from the shadows. Deegan was a meticulously groomed man, sharp and calculating. He placed a seemingly comforting hand on Gabriel's bony shoulder. "I'll handle it, Gabe. Don't stress your heart. We'll find someone else. Someone you can trust." "I trust no one," Gabriel muttered, gripping the edge of the table to steady his dizzy, light-headed spells. "No one." Deegan nodded sympathetically, but a cold, imperceptible gleam flashed in his eyes. Deegan handled the household hiring. Deegan handled the security. And Deegan secretly relished watching the king starve. A weak Don made for an easily manipulated empire. The next morning, Bridget Collins arrived at the back gates of the sprawling Navarro estate in a rusted Toyota sedan. Bridget was not a trained Michelin star chef. She was 27, deeply in debt from her late father's medical bills, and had spent the last 5 years cooking at a bustling family-owned diner in South Jersey. Bridget was a fat woman, a physical reality she carried with unapologetic grace. She had thick, soft arms, a heavy, curving waist, and round, flushed cheeks that gave her a warm, maternal aura. In a world obsessed with sharp angles and diet culture, Bea loved food. She loved the alchemy of butter garlic and heat. She understood that food wasn't just fuel, it was comfort, memory, and love. Deegan had hired her through a low-tier domestic agency. He wanted a maid to clean the massive kitchen and do basic prep work for the rotating carousel of elite chefs he brought in to fail. He took one look at Bea's plus-size figure and modest, slightly rumpled uniform, and internally smirked. He assumed she would be slow, clumsy, and entirely invisible to Gabriel. He ordered her to scrub the marble counters, wash the copper pots, and under no circumstances speak to the boss. For the first week, Bea did exactly as she was told. She polished the stainless steel appliances until they gleamed. She watched silently as another high-end chef was fired, storming out in tears after Gabriel had a panic attack at the sight of a complex duck confit. Bea noticed the untouched plates coming back to the kitchen. She noticed the half-empty bottles of chalky meal replacements in the trash. And occasionally, through the cracked kitchen door, she saw the terrifying Mafia Boss. To the heavily armed guards, Gabriel was a lethal predator. To Bridget, he just looked like a profoundly broken, starving boy. It broke her heart. Bea's entire life was built on feeding people, on watching the tension melt out of a person's shoulders after a hot, hearty meal. The sterile, paranoid energy of the Navarro kitchen felt like a tomb. She missed the rich, chaotic smells of her grandmother's cooking. She missed the sizzle of real, unpretentious food. It was Tuesday, a little past 2 in the morning. A violent thunderstorm was raging outside, rattling the reinforced windows of the estate. The mansion was deadly silent, the guards patrolling the outer perimeter. Bea couldn't sleep. The modest servants' quarters were drafty, and her own stomach was rumbling. Deciding to break Deegan's strict, no unauthorized cooking rule, she padded down to the massive industrial kitchen in her oversized sweatpants and a worn-out t-shirt. She didn't want anything fancy. She just wanted the taste of home. She raided the walk-in pantry. She found some leftover chuck roast the previous chef had abandoned, a few Yukon gold potatoes, carrots, heavy cream, and fresh rosemary. She decided to make a rustic, slow-simmered beef stroganoff with a side of incredibly rich garlic-whipped potatoes. For an hour, the kitchen transformed. Bea moved with surprising agility and grace for her size, chopping, searing, and seasoning. She didn't measure anything. She let her soul dictate the salt, the butter, the perfect splash of cooking wine to deglaze the pan. Soon the cold, clinical kitchen was filled with an intoxicating, mouth-watering aroma. It smelled like safety. It smelled like warmth. Upstairs, Gabriel lay awake in his massive silk-sheeted bed. His stomach was a tight knot of agony. The hunger pains were so sharp tonight they brought tears to his eyes, but his mind refused to let him ring for a shake. He felt like he was losing his mind. Then the smell hit him. It drifted through the vents, cutting through the sterile, lemon-scented air of the mansion. It wasn't the pretentious scent of truffle oil or saffron. It was roasted meat, caramelized onions, and browned butter. His mouth, which had been dry for over a year, suddenly watered. His stomach gave a loud, violent rumble. Driven by a primal, almost somnambulistic urge, Gabriel pushed himself out of bed. He wrapped a dark silk robe over his emaciated frame and walked out into the hallway. He followed the scent like a starving wolf. When Gabriel pushed open the kitchen doors, the sight before him made him freeze. There, standing by the industrial stove, was a large, soft-looking woman, bobbing her head to a tune she was humming under her breath. She had her back to him, stirring a massive, bubbling pot. She wasn't wearing a chef's coat. She looked incredibly out of place, yet completely at home. Gabriel leaned against the doorframe, his breathing shallow. He should call Deegan. He should have this intruder thrown out. But the smell... God, the smell. Bea turned around to grab a tasting spoon and gasped, nearly dropping her utensil. The boss of the Navarro family was standing in her kitchen, looking like the Grim Reaper himself. His dark hair was messy, his face pale, his dark eyes locked onto the pot on the stove with a terrifying intensity. I'm so sorry, Mr. Navarro. Bea stammered, instantly, terrified. She knew the stories. She knew men ended up at the bottom of the Chicago River for crossing this man. I was hungry. I know Mr. Butler said not to cook. What is that? Gabriel interrupted his voice, a hoarse whisper. He slowly walked forward. Bea stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. It's just a rustic beef stew, sir, with whipped garlic potatoes. It's peasant food, really. I'll throw it out." "Don't," Gabriel commanded, stepping up to the stove. He stared at the thick, rich gravy, the tender chunks of beef falling apart in the bubbling liquid. His chest began to tighten with the familiar panic. "It's poisoned. She's a plant." Deegan didn't vet her properly. "It's a trap." He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white, his breathing growing erratic. The panic attack was setting in. Bea watched him. She didn't see a ruthless mobster. She saw the classic signs of a severe panic response. Her maternal instincts, honed by years of taking care of her sick father, completely overrode her fear of the Mafia Don. "Hey," Bea said softly, her voice remarkably steady and warm. "Hey, look at me." Gabriel snapped his eyes to hers. He expected fear, but all he saw in her round, flushed face was deep, genuine empathy. "It's just beef and potatoes," Bea murmured, picking up a clean wooden spoon. She dipped it into the pot, scooped up a small piece of meat and some gravy, and blew on it to cool it down. Then, without breaking eye contact, she put the spoon in her own mouth and swallowed. "See?" She smiled gently. "No tricks. Just butter and thyme." Gabriel stared at her. No chef had ever done that. They had always been deeply offended by his paranoia, acting insulted that he would question their art. This fat, unassuming maid didn't judge his fear. She simply dismantled it. She picked up a small ceramic bowl and served a tiny portion, just a scoop of the creamy potatoes and a ladle of the stew. She handed him a silver spoon and pushed the bowl across the island. "Just one bite," she suggested quietly. "If you hate it, I'll wash the bowl, and you can fire me tomorrow." Gabriel looked at the bowl. His hand was trembling so violently he could barely hold the spoon. He scooped up a tiny fraction of the potato and gravy. He closed his eyes, bracing for the mental block, the gag reflex, the overwhelming taste of bitter almonds. He put it in his mouth. There was no bitterness. There was no overwhelming wave of anxiety. There was only the rich, velvety explosion of roasted garlic, the savory depth of slow-cooked beef, and the perfect grounding saltiness of homemade stock. It tasted like safety. Gabriel swallowed. It stayed down. A choked gasp escaped his lips, sounding almost like a sob. He aggressively scooped another spoonful, then another. He was eating, for the first time in a year and a half. The terrifying Don of Chicago was eating like a starving man, standing in the middle of a kitchen at 2 a.m., watched over by a plus-size maid in sweatpants. He finished the small bowl in seconds. He looked up at Bea, his dark eyes wide and frantic, waiting for the nausea to hit. Minute after minute passed. His stomach, warmed by the heavy, comforting food, simply settled. "More?" Bea asked, a soft, knowing smile touching her lips. "Please," Gabriel whispered. The next morning, Deegan Butler walked into the dining room for his usual breakfast meeting with Gabriel, expecting to see the Don looking one day closer to death. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks. Gabriel was sitting at the table, a faint, almost imperceptible flush of color in his normally ghostly cheeks. In front of him was an empty plate. "Gabe," Deegan asked, masking his shock with a fake smile. "Did you eat?" Gabriel wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, his eyes darting to the kitchen doors. "The new maid, Bridget. Tell her she's no longer cleaning." Deegan's smile tightened, a cold knot forming in his gut. "What do you mean?" "She's my personal chef now," Gabriel stated, his voice carrying a fraction of its old commanding steel. "And if anyone interferes with her or her kitchen, I'll put a bullet in their skull myself." Weeks melted into a quiet, simmering routine that completely disrupted the Navarro Syndicate's fragile hierarchy. Gabriel Navarro was no longer a ghost haunting his own hallways. He was healing. The transformation was entirely fueled by Bridget Collins and her unapologetic soul-warming cooking. Every morning, Bay arrived in the kitchen and tied an apron around her thick waist, bringing life back into the sterile mansion. She didn't serve him minimalist, deconstructed plates. She fed him mountains of buttermilk biscuits drowning in sausage gravy, rich lasagna baked with imported San Marzano tomatoes, and thick-cut ribeyes pan-seared in Kerrygold Irish butter. Gabriel ate it all. He found himself spending hours sitting at the large butcher block island, watching her work. In his violent, unpredictable life, Bea was an anchor of absolute stability. He became mesmerized by her. In a criminal underworld where women were often treated as decorative starved trophies, with sharp collarbones and hollow cheeks, Bea's fatness was a revelation of abundance and vitality. Gabriel loved the soft, heavy curve of her hips as she bumped kitchen drawers shut, the plumpness of her flush pink cheeks when she tasted a simmering sauce, and the strong, capable thickness of her arms as she kneaded dough. Her body represented everything he had been denied: warmth, softness, and survival. As Gabriel regained his weight, his ruthless edge returned. The tailored Italian suits that once hung on him like rags now stretched taut across his broadening chest and powerful shoulders. His mind cleared. The paranoid fog lifted, revealing the sharp, tactical genius that had made him the boss of Chicago in the first place. And with that clarity came a dangerous realization about his inner circle. Dr. Harrison Caldwell, a private, off-the-books physician operating quietly out of a hidden clinic near Northwestern Memorial Hospital, came for a routine checkup. Caldwell took Gabriel's vitals, checked his blood work, and looked visibly stunned. "Your iron levels are normal. Your cardiac arrhythmia is gone," Dr. Caldwell murmured, packing his stethoscope into a worn leather bag. "Whatever you are doing, Gabriel, keep doing it. A month ago, I was preparing to sign your death certificate." Deegan Butler stood in the corner of the study, his face an unreadable mask of polite satisfaction. But Gabriel, now clear-headed, caught the microscopic twitch of Deegan's jaw. The underboss wasn't relieved. He was furious. Deegan had spent the last year and a half slowly consolidating power. He had forged back-channel alliances with the Russian syndicates operating out of Brighton Beach, and had been siphoning funds through a network of shell companies tied to old mob haunts near the Green Mill Cocktail Lounge. Deegan had been the one whispering in Gabriel's ear, fueling his paranoia, telling him the other captains were plotting against him. Deegan needed Gabriel, weak, isolated, and starving to death, so he could swoop in as the grieving, reluctant successor. And now, a plus-size diner cook from South Jersey was ruining a perfectly executed coup. Late that evening, while Gabriel was in a secure meeting with his capos, Deegan slipped down into the kitchens. Bea was alone, humming softly to herself as she prepared a dark chocolate lava cake for Gabriel's dessert. "You've gotten very comfortable here, Bridget." Deegan's smooth, cold voice sliced through the warm air. Bea jumped, nearly dropping her whisk. She turned to face the underboss. Even though he was impeccably dressed in a Tom Ford suit, there was something reptilian about him that always made her skin crawl. "Mr. Butler," Bea said, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. "I'm just finishing up the boss's dessert." Deegan walked slowly toward the custom Le Cornu stove, running a gloved finger along the pristine marble counter. "You've done an admirable job nursing him back to health, but Gabriel is a predator, Bea. Right now, he thinks you're his pet, but once he's fully restored to his old violent self, he'll discard you. You don't belong in this world. Look at you." His eyes raked over her heavy figure with deliberate, calculated cruelty. "You're a peasant, playing house in a palace." Bea felt a flush of heat rise in her cheeks, but she squared her broad shoulders. Years of being bullied for her size had forged a spine of solid steel beneath her soft exterior. "I'm just a cook, Mr. Butler, but the boss is eating. That's all that matters to me. I don't care about your politics." "You should," Deegan whispered, stepping dangerously close, "because politics in this house are lethal. I strongly suggest you pack your bags and leave Chicago by tomorrow morning. I'll generously wire $50,000 to that little community bank account you use to pay off your dead father's debts. If you stay, kitchen accidents happen all the time. Gas leaks, grease fires. Tragic things." Bea's heart hammered, but she stared right into Deegan's cold eyes. "Are you threatening me because I made him strong again?" Deegan smiled a thin, bloodless line. "I'm giving you a severance package. Take it." He turned and walked out, leaving Bea trembling in the silent kitchen. She looked down at the rich, dark chocolate batter. She was terrified, but as she thought of Gabriel, the way he looked at her with such profound gratitude, the way his dark eyes softened only for her, the way he made her feel beautiful and valued, just as she was, a fierce, protective fire ignited in her chest. She wasn't running. The storm broke 2 days later. Gabriel had planned a private dinner to celebrate his official return to the head of the Navarro family table. He had summoned his top 5 lieutenants to the estate to reaffirm his total control, but before the men arrived, he wanted to share a quiet, private meal with the woman who had saved his life. He asked Bea to dine with him, not in the kitchen, but at the grand mahogany table in the formal dining room. Bea spent the entire afternoon preparing a masterpiece, an herb-crusted rack of lamb with a delicate infused mint reduction, wild mushroom risotto, and roasted asparagus. She wore a simple, elegant black wrap dress that hugged her lush curves, her hair pinned up in a neat twist. When she walked into the dining room, carrying the heavy silver tray, Gabriel stood up. His dark eyes swept over her, burning with a raw, possessive heat that made her breath catch. "You look beautiful," Gabriel said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He pulled out a chair for her, an unprecedented gesture of respect from the Don of Chicago. "Thank you, Gabriel," she murmured, her cheeks burning. It was the first time she had used his first name. Before they could sit, Deegan entered the room carrying 2 crystal tumblers of rare vintage Macallan Scotch. He offered his most charming, synthetic smile. "To your health, Gabe," Deegan said, extending a glass to his boss, "and to Bridget, for her extraordinary service. A toast before the captains arrive." Bea's eyes locked onto the glass in Deegan's hand. Her mind flashed back to the threat in the kitchen, to the way Deegan had looked at her with pure, murderous intent. She noticed something else, too. Deegan was holding Gabriel's glass by the rim, his thumb resting suspiciously close to the liquid. Gabriel reached for the glass. The old paranoia flickered in his eyes for a fraction of a second, but he suppressed it. He was determined not to be the broken, starving man anymore. "Wait!" Bea blurted out, her voice echoing loudly in the cavernous room. Both men froze. Gabriel looked at her, confused. Deegan's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "What is it, Bea?" Gabriel asked softly. Bea stepped around the table, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't have proof. She just had her gut instinct and the terrifying memory of Deegan's threat. I read that Scotch pairs terribly with mint reduction." She lied, her voice shaking slightly. "It ruins the palate. Please, let me pour you some wine instead. A Barolo." "Don't be ridiculous," Deegan snapped, his polite veneer cracking. "It's a celebratory toast. Drink, Gabe." Gabriel's eyes darted between Deegan's sudden aggression and Bea's pale, terrified face. The tactical genius in his brain fired rapidly. B never interfered with his business. She never raised her voice. "You know what, Deegan?" Gabriel said, slowly lowering his hand. "B is the culinary expert. I think I'll wait for the wine." Deegan's jaw clenched. "Gabe, this is insulting. I poured this myself." "Then you drink it." B said the words, flying out of her mouth before she could stop them. She pointed a trembling finger at the glass intended for Gabriel. "Drink that exact glass, Mr. Butler." Silence slammed into the room, heavy and suffocating. Gabriel's posture instantly shifted. The relaxed, recovering man vanished, replaced entirely by the lethal apex predator of the Chicago underworld. He didn't look at B. His dark, dead eyes locked onto his underboss. "Drink it, Deegan." Gabriel commanded, the temperature in the room plummeting to freezing. Deegan let out a forced, nervous chuckle. "Gabe, the maid is acting hysterical. She's overstepped her boundaries." "I said drink the fucking glass," Gabriel roared, drawing a customized matte black Glock 19 from his shoulder holster with terrifying speed and aiming it directly at Deegan's chest. Deegan froze. The color completely drained from his perfectly manicured face. He looked at the scotch, then at the gun. His hand began to tremble. "Gabe, be reasonable. We've known each other for 20 years. 18 months, Gabriel whispered, the horrifying realization washing over him. 18 months of starvation. 18 months of watching me die, and you were the one feeding my paranoia. You vetted the chefs. You controlled my access. It was you." Deegan lunged, reaching inside his bespoke jacket for his own weapon, but Gabriel was faster. A single, deafening gunshot shattered the crystal chandelier above. Deegan collapsed onto the Persian rug, clutching his shoulder, howling in agony, as blood instantly soaked the expensive wool of his suit. The crystal tumbler shattered on the floor, the amber liquid pooling into the intricate woven fibers. Within seconds, the heavy mahogany doors burst open. 4 of Gabriel's most loyal guards, heavily armed and wide-eyed, rushed into the room. Gabriel stood over his bleeding, traitorous underboss, the gun still smoking. "Take him down to the soundproof cellar." Gabriel ordered, his voice echoing with absolute, terrifying authority. "Get the medical kit. Patch his shoulder. I want him alive when I go down there to ask him exactly which syndicates he's been selling me out to." The guards roughly hauled the screaming Deegan out of the room. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving Gabriel and B alone in the ringing silence. Gabriel slowly lowered the gun, engaging the safety before placing it on the table. He turned to B. She was backed against the wall, her hands clamped over her mouth, tears streaming down her round cheeks. She had never seen violence like this before. Gabriel walked toward her, his expression softening completely. He didn't see her as a maid. He saw the bravest woman he had ever met, the woman who had just risked her own life to save his. "B," he whispered gently. He reached out his large, calloused hands, gently cupping her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "You're safe. I swear on my life you are safe." B let out a shuddering breath and leaned into his touch. "He told me to leave," she sobbed quietly. "He said he'd hurt me if I didn't leave." "Nobody is ever going to hurt you," Gabriel vowed, pressing his forehead against hers. "You are never leaving. Not this kitchen, not this house, and not me. You saved me, Bridget. In every way a man can be saved." He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't rushed or violent. It was slow, deep, and filled with a desperate, overwhelming gratitude. B melted against him, her thick, soft arms wrapping around his broad shoulders, anchoring him to the earth. The Navarro Syndicate changed that night. Deegan Butler was erased from existence, and Gabriel Navarro reclaimed his throne with an iron grip that no rival ever dared to challenge again. But behind the ruthless exterior of the Don of Chicago was a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the rich healing scent of garlic and butter. Bridget was no longer the invisible plus-size maid. She was the undisputed queen of the empire, a woman who proved that true power doesn't come from starving your enemies, but from feeding the people you love. Did you love this thrilling story of loyalty, betrayal, and a love that breaks all the rules? Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your fellow romance and drama lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, real-life inspired storytelling. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an update, and drop a comment below, telling us your favorite part of Bay and Gabriel's incredible journey.